In 1926, a Frenchman with dirt under his nails convinced thousands of people that a single copper wire pushed down into the ground could double a harvest with. Nothing but the electricity already hanging in the air. He had the photographs. He had the patent. He had whole fields of oats standing taller than a man. And then, inside of a generation, the whole idea was gone. Out of the books, out of the catalogs, out of the county talk. Not banned, nobody outlawed it. It just quietly stopped paying anyone to remember it. Now, I'll be straight with you the way a neighbor leaning on your fence would. The science behind this is thin. Nobody has ever nailed down the why. And there are folks online selling copper coils today with promises no honest gardener should make. So I'm not here to tell you copper wire is magic. I'm here to tell you what the old record actually says, what I watched happen on my own beds over more than 50 years, and where the whole thing has been stretched past the truth. By the end, you'll know enough to test it yourself for the price of a coffee. One bed with, one bed without, and let your own soil settle the argument. That's the only judge I trust anyway. So let me tell you about the Frenchman first, because the story is half the lesson. His name was Justin Christofleau. Born in 1865, no university behind him, no laboratory, just a stubborn streak and a patch of ground he wouldn't leave alone. Most of his life he chased one notion that the trained men of his day thought was foolishness, that a plant doesn't only eat from the soil, that it also drinks, somehow, from the sky. He built strange-looking contraptions out in his garden, metal rods, spirals, copper antennas staked up over the rows, and he kept careful notes the way a careful man does. On the 26th of October, 1925, he filed a patent in Switzerland for what he called an electromagnetic, terrestrial, and celestial apparatus. It was granted the following spring. That paper still exists. It carries the number CH118648A, and anybody can pull it up and read it. Every wire, every plate, every connection spelled out in plain drawings. I want you to sit with that for a second. Whatever you make of the man, the document is real. He wasn't whispering this in a back room. He published books on it. He invited the doubters to walk his rows and count for themselves. He printed photographs. Pumpkins wider than a barrel. Cabbages near as tall as a child. Oats said to stand 5 feet high, and ran them in the French farm papers next to his diagrams. And he didn't just preach it, he sold it. By the height of it, Christofleau was shipping his apparatus to gardeners and small farmers across France and beyond, thousands of the things, with a book to go alongside it that he simply titled Electroculture, The Man Believed. All the way down, the press couldn't decide what to do with him. Some papers ran his photographs with open wonder. Others ran them with a raised eyebrow and a careful word like remarkable if true. But nobody could ignore him. And that's the thing to understand about why this idea spread the way it did. Wasn't a rumor passed mouth to mouth. It was printed, patented, photographed, and sold over a counter. It had every mark of a real movement, which is exactly why what happened next is worth your attention. The establishment took notice too, and this is the part most folks never hear. Across the channel, the British had set up an actual government body to look into all this. The Electroculture Committee, started in 1918 under their Ministry of Agriculture. For the better part of 20 years, right up to 1936, those men gathered field photographs and yield records and testimony from experimenters like Christofleau, trying to separate the real from the wishful. Their working reports got stamped not for publication, and they cataloged everything. The giant barley, the odd devices sprouting in the gardens. And here's the honest ending to that chapter, the one I won't dress up for you. The committee never could pin it down. For every photograph of a monster crop, there was a question nobody answered. No original negatives. No outside man sent to verify the biggest claims. The proof always seemed to hover right between evidence and tall tale. So they folded up their files. Chemical fertilizer was getting cheap and reliable, and a bag you can buy beats a theory you have to argue. The wire didn't get banned. It just quit being worth anyone's money to keep teaching. That's how most of these old methods die. Not with a law, but with a price tag pointing the other way. So that's the suppression told straight. No villain, no conspiracy you have to swallow. Just an idea that nobody could sell, set down next to an idea that everybody could. Now, why would a grown man bury copper in his beans in the first place? Let me give you the part that is real, because there is a real thing underneath all the hokum. Stand out in any open field on a clear day, and there is electricity in the air over your head. You can't feel it. It won't lift the hair on your arm, but it's measurable, and the physicists have a name for it, the atmospheric potential gradient. On a fair day, the charge runs something like 100 volts for every meter you climb up off the ground. Positive up in the sky, negative down in the soil. A slow, steady difference, like a tide that never goes all the way out. And a plant sits right in the middle of that. Think of it like this, and I'll come back to this picture more than once, so hold on to it. The plant is an antenna. Its leaves and stems are covered in tiny hairs and a waxy skin, and its roots reach down into the negative ground. So the green thing standing in your row is quietly bridging the sky and the soil, the same way an antenna bridges the air and the wire running into your house. That part isn't folklore. Push a copper rod into wet ground and run a fine meter off it, and you'll catch a faint current, real as rain. So the old experimenters asked a fair question. If every plant is already a little antenna, what happens if you give it a better one? Copper carries current far easier than a cornstalk does. Stake a copper wire in the row, the thinking went, and maybe you pull a touch more of that sky charge down to where the roots are working. And there's one more piece that's real, and it's the piece that fools people, so let me lay it out plain. A plant does run on electricity, its own. Inside that stem there's a kind of slow nervous system, signals running cell to cell. When a hornworm starts chewing a tomato leaf up top, a faint electrical wave runs down the stem and tells the rest of the plant to start mounting its defenses before the worm ever gets there. Scientists have put fine wires on plants and watched those waves move, real as a heartbeat. So when a fellow tells you plants are electric, he's not lying. They are. The sleight of hand is the jump from there. From the plant uses its own tiny electric signals to sow a copper wire in the dirt will grow you bigger cabbages, is a long leap over a ditch nobody has built a bridge across. Hold those two ideas apart in your mind and you'll never be fooled by a man selling coils. That's the honest case for it. Now here's the honest case against it, because you're owed both. Nobody has ever shown in a way that holds up that the little bit of current matters to how a tomato grows. The plant's own inside wiring runs on the faintest signals. When a worm bites a leaf, a small electrical wave does travel down the stem to warn the rest of the plant. That much is measured and true. But that's the plant's own business, running on microvolts. Whether a copper stake out in the dirt adds one thing to your harvest, that's where the road runs out. The committee couldn't prove it. I can't prove it. And any man who tells you he can is selling you wire. Well, closer to 56 years I've been at this now, if I'm going to be honest about my own age, and I've buried my share of foolish things hoping the ground would reward me. Most of them, it didn't. But I'll tell you what kept me coming back to this particular one, and it's not the physics. It's that it costs almost nothing. It can't hurt a thing if you do it right. And the old gardeners who swore by it weren't fools about much else. I had a neighbor down the road years back, I'll call him Yost Lap, over in the Holmes County settlement, the way I remember the type, who buried a coil of copper wire at the head of his bean row every spring and would not be talked out of it. His beans were good. Were they good because of the wire, or because Yost was the kind of man who buried wire, the kind who fussed over a row and never let a weed get ahead of him? I never could separate the two. And that right there is the whole trouble with this method in one sentence. The careful gardener and the copper wire show up in the same garden, and you can't tell which one grew the beans. So let me give you what to actually do if you want to test it the honest way, not to chase magic, but to settle it for yourself on your own ground. First, keep it small and keep it fair. One bed with copper, one bed without, side by side, same seed, same water, same sun. If you change 3 things at once, you'll never know which one did the work. This is the rule the French committee broke, and it's why they got 20 years of pretty pictures and no answer. Don't you make the same mistake on a smaller scale. Second, use bare copper wire, the solid kind, not the coated electrical wire with the plastic skin, because the plastic just insulates the thing you're trying to expose to the soil. A few feet of it. You can coil a length and bury it a hand's depth at the head of the row, or run a single wire down the bed, or bend it into a loop around a plant. The old patterns all differ, and not one of them is proven over another. So don't let anybody charge you $40 for a special shape. Wire is wire. Third, mark the calendar and watch the right things. Put your wire in at planting and leave it the whole season. This isn't a thing you check in a week. What you're watching for at the end isn't a feeling, it's a number. Weigh what comes off the copper bed against what comes off the bare one. Same scale, same day. Beans, count the pounds. Tomatoes, count the pounds. If you can't tell the 2 beds apart on the kitchen scale come fall, then you've learned something true, and you've spent $4 to learn it, which is a bargain compared to most lessons a garden hands you. And if the copper bed does run ahead, run it again next year before you believe it, because one good season can be the weather just as easy as the wire. I rotted my first experiment bed years ago, doing exactly the opposite of what I'm telling you. Changed the seed and the wire and the watering all in the same go, got a fine crop, and had not the first idea why. Took me 3 wasted summers to learn to change one thing at a time. So learn it off me instead of off 3 summers. Now here's a real caution, and this is the factual accuracy part I won't skip, because this is where a cheap test can turn into a real mistake. Copper is a soil nutrient in tiny amounts. Plants do need a trace of it, but copper in quantity is toxic to the soil. It'll kill the earthworms and the microbes that actually feed your plants, and unlike a season of fertilizer, it does not wash out. It stays put in that ground for years. So a few feet of wire as an experiment, fine. Grinding up copper and tilling it through your bed, or dumping copper sulfate to charge the soil, that is how you sterilize good dirt and regret it for a decade. Test with a wire you can pull back out. Never salt your ground with copper. If you remember one thing from an old man today, let it be that one. Let me stop here a moment, because I've thrown a lot at you. Here's where we are. There was a real Frenchman with a real patent you can still read, who believed the sky feeds the soil. There's a real electric field in the air, and a plant really is a kind of antenna standing in it. And there's a real reason it all fell out of the books. Not a law, just a cheaper bag on the shelf. What there isn't is proof that the copper does anything for your harvest. So we test it small, we test it fair, and we don't poison the ground doing it. And while you've got that one bed set aside for the wire, let me tell you what I'd put my faith in on the other bed. The things that aren't thin at all. The things 50 years has shown me past any doubt, because the gift of the old methods isn't the copper. It's that the old gardeners watched the ground close, and most of what they did really works. Mulch is the first one. The bare dirt garden is the thirsty garden. Lay 3 or 4 inches of straw or old leaves over the soil, and you cut your watering near in half. You hold the ground at an even temperature when the July sun would otherwise bake it hard, and you smother out the weeds that would have stolen the water anyhow, and as that mulch breaks down, it feeds the worms, and the worms feed the bed. That's not a theory, and it's not old wives. That's the plain difference between hauling water every single evening in August and walking past a row that holds its own for the better part of a week. If you do one thing different this year, cover your soil. I'd put that ahead of every clever trick I know, copper included. Compost is the second. The old-timers didn't buy fertility by the bag. They made it from what the place gave them. Kitchen scraps, garden trimmings, the leaves everybody else burns. Think of your soil like a savings passbook. Every bit of organic matter you lay down is a deposit, and a deposit draws interest year over year as it rots into the dark, crumbly stuff a root loves. Chemical fertilizer is the opposite. It's a withdrawal that feels like a deposit. It greens the plant up fast and leaves the soil a little poorer each time, until one day you're feeding the bag instead of the bed. Third, and here's where the old wisdom actually touches the electric story, don't tear your soil up more than you must. Underground there's a web of fine fungus, finer than thread, that hitches onto plant roots and reaches out into the ground hundreds of times farther than the root could on its own, hauling back water and minerals in trade for a little sugar. Your grandmother never heard the word for it, but she knew the rules without the name. Don't dig more than you have to. Don't leave the ground bare. Don't pour on things that kill what you can't see. Every one of those rules guards that hidden web. And the high nitrogen bag of fertilizer, the very thing that put the copper wire out of business, it suppresses that fungus. That's the part that ought to sting a little. The cheap, convenient answer didn't just replace the old methods. It quietly tore up the free engine that was feeding your plants all along. Let me catch my breath there for a second, because that last part matters more than the whole copper story. You see what's happened, don't you? We started out chasing the flashy thing, the wire, the sky electricity, the patent with the long name. And the truth turned out to be quieter and a good deal more useful. The harvest was never hiding in the copper. It was hiding in the dirt the whole time, in a web of fungus and worms and rotting leaves that cost you nothing but the discipline to stop tearing it up. The Frenchman was half right in a way that surprises me still. The soil really is alive, and it really will feed your plants better than any bag if you let it. He just reached for the sky when the answer was under his boots. So put your copper in if you like. It's cheap and it's harmless, and you might just find something I never did. And if you do, you tell me, because I'll listen to a man's own beds before I'll listen to any committee. But put your real work into the mulch and the compost and the keeping still of the soil. That's the wire that's actually charged. Let me leave you with this. The Frenchman died believing the sky would feed us if only we'd learn to listen. And the men in their offices decided he couldn't prove it and shut the file. Maybe they were right, but notice what we traded. We traded a thing nobody could sell for a thing anybody could. And we called that progress. And the soil got poorer while the bill got higher. Today a man pays record prices for a bag of fertilizer and watches his ground go lifeless underneath it, and somewhere there's an old patent still sitting on a shelf asking a question we never quite answered. I'm not asking you to take my word for any of it. That's the whole point. Bury one wire this spring against one bed without, and let the ground answer you the way it answered me, slow and honest and in its own time. Tell me down below what county you're in and what your soil's like, sandy or clay or that good black loam, and I'll do my best to point you right. The ground remembers what we give it. The only question worth asking is what you're going to give it this year.